Thank you for joining me for Easy WordPress Security for Everyone. Version 2.0 is so called because I actually gave more or less the same presentation last year at WordCamp Omaha, but I've added a little bit of new stuff as I've learned some new stuff. I don't know if you guys know this about WordPress, but there's a lot to know, so you learn stuff pretty frequently. I am on Twitter at JJ Collinsworth, although I mostly tweet opinions and curse words, so that's up to you if you want to follow that. I infrequently blog about design and development on my website, and I work at Flywheel. And specifically, I'm what we call a happiness engineer. I work on the support team. And aside from that, I'm also actually a contractor for Interface School here in Omaha, which means that I teach one of their courses, specifically the WordPress development course. So as you can sort of get the picture by this point, I'm pretty much knee-deep in WordPress at any given moment of my life. And this is, of course, Flywheel. We all heard Dusty give a great keynote to kick us off today. Interface Web School offers all kinds of development courses, both WordPress specific and those outside of WordPress. If you're just looking to learn, say, Java or just an introduction to web development, all kinds of courses are available. But as far as WordPress itself is concerned, I noticed there are generally two questions people ask about security, and it's always one or the other that people ask. And it's either A, how can I make my site more secure? And hopefully you've got that question, and that's why you're here, and I've got some answers to that. And if the people who haven't asked that question, if they've gone long enough, they inevitably ask the second question, which is, can you clean the malware from my site for me, please? Yes, Flywheel can do that. But it would have been better if you had just asked the first question to begin with. So that's really what we're going to be focusing on is that first part. And I do believe that WordPress security is fairly easy. Not that it should be taken lightly, not that you can really afford it not to take it seriously, but I think a lot of people are intimidated and feel that it must be very complex and involve things that they don't understand. And there's actually a lot of things you can do to secure a WordPress site that are not that difficult and that are indeed for everybody. I think people just don't know where to start or why it matters, and I think there's a lot of confusion about what people are protecting themselves from. And that's one of the big things I do want to talk about as well, because we can better sort of defend ourselves if we know what we're defending ourselves from. So let's fix all of that. This falls into three broad categories. Some common WordPress security misconceptions that may or may not sort of overlap with just general web misconceptions in security. Why you need a better password if you want a lovely subtitle for that section. Why WordPress security matters for everyone, and easy ways to keep your site safe, which is probably what you want to know about, and that's why it's at the end, so you'll stick around. So, common WordPress security misconceptions, section 1. The big myth that goes around with, I think, the web in general, not just WordPress, but anything we have an account for, anything that we can log into, is if there's nothing valuable there, nobody cares about it, right? We tend to think that we don't really need to care too much about the security of our blog because it's just our blog, and why does anybody want to pretend to be us and write blog posts, right? But that's a really kind of a dangerous misconception, because it's like thinking nobody's going to steal your car because your wallet's not in it. People have, just because, in much the same way that a thief can use your car even if there's nothing valuable inside of it, somebody can use your website even if its content is not actually valuable to them. I showed this map, and this is actually quite a while ago now. This is probably a year ago that this happened, but there was a giant, this is sort of a mischaracterization, but internet outage, if you will, about a year ago. That you may remember, like Spotify was down, and I think Amazon was down for a long time, and for a big part of this one day about a year ago, you just couldn't really rely on the internet at all. The way that this happened, they found out in retrospect, was that a bunch of not very nice people got together and figured out the default passwords on several Internet of Things devices. So, you know, microwaves or refrigerators or DVD players, TVs, all of these things that can be internet connected that we have access to, these all ship from the factory with default passwords installed. And these not so great guys were smart enough to realize that most humans are probably not going to bother changing that password. And so they stored up this collection of passwords that were just defaults for all of these devices that were in everybody's households, that were connected to the internet. And what they were doing with these was not trying to get into anybody's bank account or anything that we, you know, sort of might think of as the typical end goal of a hacker or internet bad guy. What they did was just had all of these devices signed into all of them at once and had them all start sending an overload of requests to these internet DNS servers all around where you see these red areas. So these servers, in turn, could not direct internet traffic where they needed to go, because they were just overloaded with requests from all of these household devices that were connected to the internet, and they succeeded really in bringing down a chunk of the internet as we know it. Unless you happened to be savvy enough to bypass DNS and that kind of thing. But what I tell this whole story to tell you is that your site in and of itself may not have value to anybody, or to a bad guy, I should say. Yeah, hopefully your site has value to somebody. It has value to you, I hope. But a hacker, an internet bad guy, a whoever, they might not want your site, they want a site. They want something on a live server. They want something that can send connections. They want bandwidth, all right? And just because there's nothing valuable on your site doesn't mean it doesn't have those things. So your site is desirable no matter what's actually on it. So second myth, a lot of people, there's sort of a misconception that WordPress is vulnerable, because you do hear about, you know, hacks or vulnerabilities that are discovered, and people think that they can't trust it. And that's really simply not true. It's not vulnerable, it's just popular. And there's a very, very important distinction between those two things. If you look at all of these sites on the internet that aren't just spam, more than 1 in 4 is run on WordPress. I think it's around 27, 28% at this point. So it is the single biggest target out there. And so, of course, the people who are devoting their shady lives to try and hack stuff are going to go after that biggest fish in the sea. Now, that doesn't mean it's insecure. On the contrary, it's actually, as a core piece of software, WordPress is actually incredibly secure. And it has the backing of a gigantic open source community so that it can be constantly updated. It can be constantly developed in the event of something going wrong, which, you know, little things will come up here and there. WordPress actually even announced a bug bounty program not that long ago. So if people find vulnerabilities, they can actually be rewarded for bringing those to the attention of the WordPress core development group. So don't confuse popular with vulnerable. It's very different things, and to whatever extent WordPress is targeted because of its popularity, it is also protected because of its popularity. We kind of covered this already. No hackers have any reason to come after me or my site personally, so I'm safe. The truth is, hacks, vulnerabilities, exploits, these kinds of things, they are never personal. And in fact, I bring this up really to bring up sort of a nested misconception, which is that there is an actual person on the other end of a hack. And most of the time, that is not true at all. You are not being targeted because of who you are, and you are probably not being targeted by a person at all. What happens in most cases, this is just, there are a lot of different things that can happen with security online, but this is the most common one. And there's this soulless bot, and this soulless bot is programmed to go out and crawl the internet looking for WordPress sites, and when it finds one, it will, of course, add /wp-admin to the end of the URL because it knows that's where the login page for a WordPress site is. And then it will proceed to try to log in with common usernames and passwords. There's a very good reason that the common username that I chose is admin, because that is the most common one out there. And they'll try to get their way in with admin and, password with a 0 instead of an O and a bunch of dumb stuff like that, and it'll work at some point. And this bot probably has some sophisticated actual programming behind it to either try passwords that have been known to work before, or try passwords that sort of meet common patterns that people are likely to use. I'll talk a little bit more about that here shortly. And the fourth myth is that a decent login alone is strong enough to keep hackers out. And if your password is strong enough, then that's largely true. But the strength of that password is really key in all of this, but especially if it's really what you're relying on. Because a lot of these bots, like I mentioned, they're smart enough to actually crawl your site and use words and phrases from the site to guess the username and password, right? Some of them might just be guessing generic things, right? Some of them are sophisticated enough to crawl your site and be like, okay, this is a site about skiing, for example, and to try username and passwords that might have the word ski in them. Here's an example. Let's say you run a site called guitarshop.com. I don't know what's actually at the URL, if anything is. I just pulled it out of the air. But even a bot that is not that sophisticated will probably try usernames like those. Well, let's assume it can actually get a little bit of info on your site. It can pick up on what keywords appear, what is happening on your site a lot. It'll try to infuse those, and it'll try passwords like you see in the right column here, because those are the common ways that people use passwords that we remember our passwords, right? We have to have something we can remember, but we've had this thing drilled into our heads forever that we need a piece of punctuation and a special character and uppercase and lowercase and numbers and your mother's maiden name and the last 4 digits and all that. And so here's one thing I want to point out. Okay, I'll come back to the passwords in a second, but these usernames on the left, the username is half of the combination, right? The password is by far the important part, but your username is half of the sort of equation as well. And on WordPress, so you know, while this is the less important part, it is possible to find out what your username is on a WordPress site with a thing called user queries. And how it works is this. Anybody can visit your site, and they just add $author equals 1 to the end of the URL. You can try this on your own WordPress site if you want to right now. What will happen if you do actually have an author with the ID number of 1 is that query will redirect to a list of all of that author's posts, all the posts that they have written, and the URL will change to show their username. That's expected behavior, right? WordPress was originally built as a blogging platform, so you want to be able to find authors and the posts that they have written. But it doesn't work very well if your site is not a blog and you don't want that behavior happening. In this case, the bot will then just take that author username off of the end of the URL, repeat for as many authors as it can get, and try, and now it has the actual username and it just needs to get the password. So that's why passwords are exceptionally important, because your username, A, can be guessed fairly easily, and B, depending on the setup of your site, might actually be visible to anybody. So the password is really, really, really important. A strong password is, in fact, the linchpin of online security. And I like to use this analogy. It doesn't matter how good your security system is if you don't bother blocking the front door. You can block user queries, and that's a good idea. But without a strong password behind it, it's only doing so much. I'm going to talk about passwords for a little bit here because they're exceptionally important for anything online, And if you take away one thing from what I'm telling you here today, please, please, please make it use a very strong password and what that should actually look like. So, absolutely, positively, non-negotiable password rules. Number one, your password should be 100% unique. It should never be used for anything else. When a bot successfully logs in somewhere, there's a good chance it will try that same password other places. Especially if your login is your email address. It may go and try to log into your email account with that same password. Anytime you're using the same password in more than one place, that's a vulnerability you're setting yourself up for. Password should be 100% unique. It should be long with lots of O's. And it should not be some slightly transformed version of your name or the site's name or admin something or Ski Colorado or whatever it is. We'll talk about that more in a second. And here's what I really like to consider the ultimate password test. Should not be anything that anybody you know would be able to guess, even if the fate of the world depended on it. Dun, dun, dun. This is my password test. I like to call it the alien test. All right? So here's how the alien test works. For some weird reason, your site's password has become Earth's last offensive. I don't know why this happened, but you're a much more important person than you apparently realized, and we'll just go with it. Aliens have realized this. They have realized that cracking your password is the last key to their taking over the planet, and so they've beamed up and brainwashed every person you have ever known in your life. If there is a chance that those people, everybody you've ever known, could get through your password in 24 hours, it's probably not strong enough. I know that's a harsh test, and people of Earth are going to be mad if they can do that. And a lot of you are probably sitting here thinking, I have no idea how I'm going to actually make that happen. That sounds awful. Don't worry. Stick with me. Don't run out of the room screaming just yet. Here is my advice for anybody who uses technology, is use a password manager, and I mean the word literally, literally. Literally anybody who uses technology should probably be using a password manager. If you have more than about 3 things that you log into, 3 to 5, depending on how much brain space and processing power you're willing to devote to your passwords, I would use a password manager. And if you're not familiar with a password manager, what these are essentially vaults for all of your passwords. You store them in this program that works on your computer, your phone, whatever, and they can generate random, very long, very secure passwords for you and store them for you so that you don't have to remember them. In a lot of cases, they actually enter them automatically for you as well, so you don't have to go in and actually type out your password. You just have, maybe it's a browser extension, or maybe it's an app on your computer, or maybe a lot of cases password managers work on your phone too, so that you just scan your fingerprint and they just go ahead and input your password because you have it stored in the app there. The only thing you have to remember is your one master password. So a password manager will be a program that stores all of your passwords for you, but obviously that's got to be locked extremely securely. So you have one single master password that you have to remember to get into your vault. But the beautiful, and obviously this creates a single point of failure. This is, it does you no good to use a password manager if your password manager master password is going to be 8 characters long and your dog's name. That's a really, really bad idea. Your master password should be ridiculously long and complex, but it can be because it's the only password you ever need to remember again. I use a password manager, and other than its login and maybe one other, I have no idea what any of my passwords are. None. I have probably 150 logins to various things, and all I know is that they are completely random, they're extremely long, and none of them are the same. If it weren't for my password manager, I would be locked out of everything. And obviously you can always do resets via email and stuff like that. Like, you're never really truly locked out unless you maybe delete your email address. But a password manager makes all of this easy, right? The reason we use bad passwords is that we can't devote the mental energy we need to make them as strong as they can be. The password manager solves that problem. Your master password needs to be very impressive. And here's a couple of suggestions I have. LastPass is a little cheaper than 1Password, and in my experience, it's actually honestly a better user experience. I think it works a little more easily. It's a little more smooth. People tell me 1Password is costs more because it has a little bit better track record, or is a little more secure. Either way, and not that either of them, to my knowledge, have ever been, found to be insecure or anything like that. And there are others besides these two. These are just the two biggest ones. But whatever you do, I hope that you will at least consider using one of these, or at least following these rules. And when you create a manually created password, such as your master password, what should it actually look like? Obviously, it should be very, very long. I personally would not go with anything under 16 characters. Whenever I can, I go with 30 or more. Now, we panic when we hear that because we think that our passwords have to be like this collection of illegible nonsense, but that's not actually always the case. A long phrase works well, or several just plain words put together that you can remember together work well. Sure, you should sprinkle in maybe some numbers, maybe some special characters, so it's not, plain text or whatever. But the thing is, with passwords, with the way that we've sort of trained ourselves to use them over the last several years, we've really gotten to the point where they're extremely difficult for us to remember and actually extremely easy for bots to crack. So back to this Guitar Shop example, our password might look like this, right? It's a version of Guitar Shop, but we've just subbed in random special characters for words, right? 6 kind of looks like a G, exclamation point kind of looks like an I, plus sign kind of looks like a T, etc. And let's admit it, we all have passwords like this. And if we check this by a normal, sort of password strength measure, it'll say, yeah, that looks great, this is good. It's 10 characters, it's upper and lowercase, it's got numbers, it's got special characters, you're golden. But the fact is, it's a bad password. Because these are common substitutions, and it's the name of the site. Like, any person and any bot will guess that before all that long. But you will have a hard time remembering it, because you'll be sitting here saying, oh man, which was the U lowercase or uppercase? Did I use a T? Did I use the plus sign? And you'll probably burn through all of your login attempts trying to type it right away. This is a comic from xkcd.com that I really like, and it just sort of literally illustrates this problem, right? First panel, we've got a password. It's a weird name with some common substitutions, and we've thrown in a couple of extra characters because we're supposed to. And the fact is that that's not that hard to guess for a bot, for a machine trying to crack it, because all of these substitutions that we're doing up here are common. Bots know how our brains work. They know that we need to come up with something that we can remember. And to do that, we're probably going to use the same things that all the other people out there are using. This is sort of a side tangent, but there was a giant, this is several years ago now, but there was a giant leak of PIN codes that people use for their ATM. And it was something like the top 0.1% of PIN, like number choices, represented the top like 50% of codes that people use. And like almost every number starting with a 19 was in the top 100, because people choose dates. They choose things they can remember, right? We humans, we choose things we can remember, and that makes us predictable. So this password example here in the first panel, it's predictable. and it's hard for us to remember. But on the second line here, we have just 4 random words. Just 4 simple words, and that actually is much, much harder for a bot to crack because it's longer, it's unrelated to anything, it doesn't follow a pattern or convention that any bot is familiar with, and it's actually pretty easy for us to remember. We just have to remember 4 words, and yeah, maybe we would get the order wrong sometimes, but this is actually more effective in a lot of cases. And having something that's long and doesn't match the expected convention is worth a lot more than a number, an uppercase letter, a lowercase letter, a piece of punctuation, etc. So, hope that gives you an idea. I'm going to move on from me proselytizing about strong passwords to talk about why WordPress security matters for everybody. Maybe this is your situation. Maybe you have a site and you manage it. Maybe you built it yourself. Maybe you're the only person, and so obviously WordPress security matters for you in this case. Maybe it's a one-to-one relationship. There's a designer-developer who built the site, and the client then manages the site. Or maybe there's a designer and a developer and a client. Maybe there's a copywriter involved in the mix as well. By the time we get too far up the ladder, eventually we've got a situation where we've got, I don't even know what this is, like 15 people who are touching the site. And this might not be unrealistic if you are dealing with a large website project or you're working with an agency or something like this. Like, this is not anywhere outside the bounds of reality by any means. But every single person who touches this site from the time it starts, from the time it's complete, is a potential vulnerability. The person who spun that site up on the demo server on day 1 may have just created a default user with a bad password, and that carries through every single one of those. They may have not installed this the proper security protocols. They may not have been properly communicating to the people down the line. So everybody who touches that, everybody who can do anything on the site can be a vulnerability for the site. I love this quote: "An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure." And Ben Franklin said that, probably not about WordPress, but it's absolutely true when it comes to web security. Preventing a problem is much easier than solving it, and in fact, that's just kind of a fundamental truth of life, no matter what we're talking about, whether it's robbery, disaster, disease, whatever it may be, problems are easier to prevent than to fix. This is especially true online, this is especially true of malware. So the place that I'm going to encourage us to invest our time when it comes to security is in prevention. That's why I spent so much time on passwords, because that's a form of prevention. And it's a lot easier to prevent than it is to fix. A new default WordPress installation has 1,624 files and folders. And another fun fact, there are at least 131 rows of data in a brand new WordPress install. That may have gone up by now, but by the time you've created much content, it's probably gone up to over 1,000, maybe several thousand. Third fun fact, major study found that around 40% of sites infected with malware will become reinfected. And every single one of those files and every single one of those database rows could be a target for that malware. And fourth and final fun fact, none of those facts were actually fun at all. I'm sorry, I lied to you about the word fun. But the point I'm trying to make here is that when we get started on the right foot, and when these people who are very first in line with a website, no matter how long the line is, no matter how many people are involved in it, when you get started doing things the right way, it prevents future infections. Whereas if we're down here and we're trying to implement security, it doesn't work backwards. We're not removing insecure plugins or users with bad passwords from the database at this point. We need to be focused on prevention, preventing the problem from ever happening before it becomes a problem. So everyone has the power to prevent. I would hazard a guess that, correct me if I'm wrong, but I would hazard a guess that most people in this room do not have a clue how to clean up malware. I work for a managed WordPress hosting company, and I just barely know. But That's not my position, not because we're bad at it. But even if you don't know how to clean up things, you can definitely be part of the prevention. You can help stop it from happening. So let's talk about some other ways to do that. Hopefully the password sermon has sunk in, but aside from that, let's talk about a few other ways that you can keep your site safe. And because this talk is easy WordPress security for everyone, all the stuff that I'm going to mention here is free. There are premium solutions out there, and there are things you can do that are more advanced than this, that require a little bit more investment, that might require a developer or you talking to your host or something like that. But these really are the big things, and they're easy to do, and anyone can do them. So WordPress.org/plugins, all the plugins I'm going to mention at this point are just in the repository, free to search and install for everybody. First off, always use strong-ass passwords. We've covered this. I don't need to go back into it. A non-obvious username does help. Ideally, you don't want to be using admin or site name admin as your username. But that's far and away less important than the password is. All right. I would rather see you use the most obvious username in the world with a strong password than have both be mediocre. There is a plugin called Force Strong Passwords that you can use if you are so inclined. And if you're the only person logging into this site, or if it's maybe you and one other person, something like that, this probably doesn't make a lot of sense for you. You've been here, you've seen the light. But if you have a site where users can create their own logins, or maybe you have 10 or 20 content creators, or maybe you're going to be adding more content creators down the line, adding this plugin can be a really good idea because that saves you from the embarrassment of a hack when you find out that somebody's password was 12345 or something like that. One of my absolute favorite suggestions for WordPress is move your login screen. Earlier I mentioned that bots will just crawl the web looking for WordPress sites and then go to WP admin and try to hack their way in. They can't do that if your login screen isn't where it's supposed to be. So move or hide your WordPress login screen. And to do that, it's very simple. There are actually several plugins you can use to do this. WPS Hide Login is just my personal favorite. It's just very simple. It does one thing. You install it, and then in your settings screen, it has a little box where you set what you want your new login URL to be. Now that has a default, and you should change that default. I think it's /login is the default. That's not much better. But you could change it from /wp-admin to /knock-knock, or /something about your organization, or maybe you manage a site for a church, you could do /John316 or something like that. Whatever you want to be that is unique, and that makes just getting to your login screen a form of authentication in and of itself. Because people, unless I have a way to track your actual traffic, they're not going to be able to guess that probably. They're most likely not going to invest the time to try to guess the login screen to then also try to guess the login. And if you try to visit /wp-admin while that plugin is activated, this is what you'll see. The bot with the question mark, I put that there. That's just me. But you'll just see that little message that says this has been disabled. And you'll just be stopped in your tracks, and that's all there is to it. And I love that plugin for that reason. You should prevent brute force attacks, or at least mitigate them. I mentioned a moment ago, bots will just try to guess passwords and usernames, or maybe they have the username and they'll guess passwords. But if they can do that with impunity, if they can just go ahead and try that all they want, then really all you've done is delayed the certainty of them getting through. Finding a way to prevent or mitigate brute force attacks is absolutely essential in WordPress security. There are plugins for this as well, with varying levels of reviews and that kind of thing, but there are lots of these. And hopefully you're on a good host, because most of the time a good managed host will take care of this for you. This isn't something that you should need to worry about with WordPress unless you're just kind of on a really cheap hosting platform that's just sort of bare bones, right? If you're using managed WordPress, this shouldn't be something you need to worry about. If you do, just look up plugins to prevent brute force or limiting login attempts, things like that. And what these do is, they set a limit on how many times a person from one IP can try to log into a site unsuccessfully, and then they'll get locked out. And the more they try, the longer the lockout is. I will give you one warning if you do use a plugin like this. If you have lots of people, let's use the church example again. Let's say you have lots of people in your church who are all on the church's Wi-Fi network, and they're all signing into the site. They're on one IP address. So if we're all on that, and you fail once, and I fail once, and you fail once, we're all locked out.
Same for classes.
Yes, oh yeah, classes. Another good example.
Yeah.
So you can adjust those settings with most of these plugins. So however many attempts are allowed before a lockout happens, you may want to adjust that up to, it'll depend on the situation, but having it there is the important part. I recommend using Akismet or another plugin to prevent comment spam. Most comment spam really isn't harmful to the site itself, but it could potentially be bad for your users, right? If I can just comment with some dumb spammy code on your website, it might not matter, maybe. I guess it could. If you don't allow commenting at all, if your WordPress site is just a brochure website, this doesn't really matter. You don't really need this if people can't comment. And it doesn't have to be Akismet. I don't care what it is, but it's a good thing to have in place. Just bear in mind with Akismet, it comes pre-installed with WordPress, but you still need to configure. It's not one that you just install and activate and walk away from. It's a very simple process. All you have to do is get an API key from WordPress.com and copy and paste it. That's it. But it isn't just a plug-and-play plugin. It does require about a minute of setup. I highly, highly recommend adding some form of CAPTCHA to all site forms. And that does not include just the login screen, although the login screen should be included. And I know we all hate CAPTCHA. I know it's a pain. It sucks. But the fact is that anything that can send data to your site has to be considered a vulnerability. And that includes your login screen. That includes a sign up for our newsletter box. That includes even really a search field. Like anything a user visiting your site could potentially use to send your site some kind of data. I guess search field is extreme. I take that back. But anything to search or to send your site data of some kind, like if you're recording an email address, if somebody's logging in, if somebody's filling out a contact form, that is going into your database. So you shouldn't just allow anything to go into your database. You should have some kind of CAPTCHA on there. And even innocuous things can be harmful. Like a human could accidentally send something harmful. So having CAPTCHA on there just kind of prevents that from happening. There's tons of CAPTCHA plugins out there. Whatever works for you is great. I included this screenshot because it's Google reCAPTCHA, and it's the one where you just like click and it just spins for a second and gives you the check mark. Like you don't actually have to do a math problem or anything. I'm a big fan of making it easy on users. But if you just want to make your users do math, go for it.
So speaking of that, what do you think about using a honeypot instead of a CAPTCHA?
I guess I would say I'm not all that familiar with honeypot.
Honeypot's just a hidden field, not the input type hidden, but it's using CSS to hide it, and then the form expects it to be blank when it's submitted.
Ah, okay.
So the bot thinks it has to fill something out, and that gets rejected.
Okay.
It's one of the checkboxes in Gravity forms, so I was wondering if you...
I would say I think that sounds like a good idea. I would say I think that probably sounds like it should be not the only thing you're relying on, because it sounds like it's something that a sophisticated enough bot could go ahead and pick up on.
That's kind of what I thought too.
By the way, 3 rules of plugin and themes. Only use well-reviewed and well-maintained themes and plugins from reputable sources. If it's in the repository, it's safe to trust that it's not malicious, but it's not necessarily safe to trust that it works exceptionally well. Try to find plugins that are well-reviewed and that are maintained regularly. don't use more plugins than you need. Obviously, a lot of the stuff that I've recommended is plugins, and that's fine. But when I see a site that has like 100 installed plugins, I'm like, come on, like you don't need all of these, especially when like 30 of them are inactive. Like, just cut them out. They can be a vulnerability even if they're inactive. They can do things even if they're inactive, and they can make your site slow even if they're inactive. So just get rid of what you don't actually need, and always, 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 always keep your plugins updated. After a weak password, the #1 biggest source of WordPress vulnerabilities and hacks and stuff like that is out-of-date plugins. And a lot of times there'll be 2 or 3 of them used in concert. This plugin might have a vulnerability that lets me create a subscriber. And that's not very useful on its own, but this other plugin you've got might have a vulnerability that lets me change the user level of a user that already exists. So those 2 together suddenly allow me to create an admin user on your site. Always keep your plugins up to date. 2-factor authentication might be redundant if you're doing some of the other stuff I've already mentioned, but you can do it. There's lots of 2-factor plugins out there. Jetpack is on that list. Tons of stuff you can do. I didn't mention security plugins like WordFence exclusively. That's another thing that hopefully you have a good managed host that is helping take care of those things for you. But if not, if you're on a bare bones, budget server and you need to handle security on your own, WordFence is definitely a good idea, or another similar security plugin. And a third-party service like Cloudflare can be a nice thing to utilize. And if you're not familiar with Cloudflare, I'm going to give you just like a super quick rundown of it. This is how web interactions normally work. I'm a user, I'm a browser, I type in your web address, I get a response back from your server, and it's just a one-to-one communication. Cloudflare kind of gets in the middle there, and adds some security and some other nice features in the middle where it is. And one of those nice features is hiding your site's IP address, so that you're less susceptible to, a DDoS attack on a lone WordPress site is pretty uncommon, but it could happen. Things like that. A few more recommendations. Blocking author queries is nice. It's not something you need to be panicked about. It's a nice added feature. I would much rather see you use a very strong password than be worried if people know your username. Always keep the WordPress core version up to date. Like I said, they are constantly updating it in case things are discovered. And if something breaks when it's updated, fix it or get rid of it. If you update your site and your site doesn't look right anymore or it doesn't work anymore, the solution is not to leave your site out of date. The solution is to fix it or get rid of it. Maybe that requires contacting hosting support. Maybe that requires hiring a developer. Maybe it just requires reading some documentation. It's going to be work, and I know that sucks, and nobody wants to do that, but it's prevention. Preventing a bigger problem from falling down later down the road is going to be well worth whatever time you spend, or whatever money you spend even, making sure that happens. And if you do use well-reviewed plugins, like that really shouldn't happen. At most, it should happen temporarily if a new version suddenly drops and they have to like update their plugin real fast. It shouldn't be something you need to worry about, but if it does happen, fix it or ditch it. Oh, and just an extra little nice thing you can do, install an SSL certificate and make sure your site can only load over HTTPS. This isn't necessarily site security, it just makes sure that nothing sent to or from your site can be read by a third party. Ordinarily, if somebody is filling out the contact form on your site via a normal unsecured connection, it's theoretically possible that I could get in the middle and read the contents of that contact form. And hopefully people aren't sending you their credit card numbers in your contact form anyway, so it shouldn't matter that much, but installing an SSL certificate and making sure your site forces HTTPS and only uses that secure protocol, make sure that all data is encrypted to and from the site. So it's a nice thing to add. And finally, of course, I work at Flywheel, I'm obligated to say this, but I really truly do believe you should use a good host. And any managed host should help you with security. They should provide support for you. They should take backups of the site. I didn't mention backups. Take backups of your site. And they should have some kind of emergency solution in case something goes horribly wrong. Good host takes care of things that sucks. This is not a sales pitch. I am not here to tell you to use Flywheel. I'll be delighted if you do, but I would rather see you use WP Engine or GoDaddy or SiteGround or whoever it is that helps you with this stuff than save a few bucks and have a huge crisis on your hands. Use a good managed host that will be your partner in keeping your site up and running and safe. And that's it. That's all I have for you. Thank you guys for listening. I think we've got like 4 minutes maybe for questions.
This is like a confession here. I use LastPass, and suppose that I do all the other things that you tell me, but I have the same password on, 20 out of my 150 things. Is it worth going in and spending all that time changing them, really?
The likelihood that it will matter is fairly low. But if it does matter, it's probably going to matter a lot. As I recall, LastPass has a feature where it can detect your duplicate passwords and help you fix those.
All the time, it reminds me.
For me, it's like, okay, the likelihood that that matters, like that they get simultaneously hacked or whatever, is pretty slim to none. But the likelihood that I'm going to be annoyed by LastPass telling me about it is really high, so I'm just going to fix it and be done with it and not have that mental energy devoted to it.
You say it automates it.
Yes, LastPass does have the ability to update passwords for you automatically.
Okay.
I don't think it works on every website necessarily, but those that work as expected, you can just kind of click a button and it'll be like, great, I put a new password in place for you.
As I was going to ask, because I guess sometimes like every 3 months you have to come up with a new password that you did not use the last 10 times.
But it's going to be the same one, but with like one character changed, because that's how we all operate.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, so with WPS Hide Login, is that a plugin you can install and then delete after it's changed it, or do you need to leave that?
You do need to leave it, because the process that it runs to change the login screen, if you deactivate or uninstall it, it'll just go back to what it was before. But that's good to know. If you ever get locked out, you forget what you put in there, all you have to do is like move the plugin file or in FTP and you're back to where you were. Yes?
So, I think I already know the answer, but you can publicly shame me. If I've got this theme and I want to keep using it, but it hasn't been updated in a couple months, is that a warning? It's not like abandoned ship?
No. My threshold for worrying about something being updated would be like 1 to 2 years, probably. Like WordPress changes a lot, but its actual core functionality, how things work, doesn't change fast enough for a couple of months to be something to worry about.
Well, 6 months.
6 months would be worth thinking about. I mean, a theme is a little, well, I don't know. It depends on the theme, yeah.
And also there's that functionality now in, I think, both repos, in the plugin and theme repo, that like if something's really broken, you can just click a button that's like, this is really broken. And so like the highest priority things, I think developers now have an opportunity to fix quickly. And so if they haven't gotten anything that says this is really broken, like probably there's nothing major going on, as far as I can tell.
Well, I asked because you said if you update your WordPress core, something else breaks, and there's this theme.
So like when you go to 4.8 or whatever, the theme just doesn't work anymore?
Yeah, a couple major updates ago, it moved on.
Yeah, that's probably worth getting rid of, unfortunately. Because if something like that is breaking in WordPress, like if you update the core WordPress version and a plugin or theme like doesn't come along for the ride, then it's still using some code that either WordPress themselves or PHP itself has decided is not worth using anymore, for whatever reason that may be. So, in that case.
And you deserve a new design plan. I mean, it's like, it's going to be fun to have a new look at your website. That was a good try, right?
If I send the developer a check for $100, Please just update your theme. That would actually be easy.
It might be worth asking them if there is a specific known issue with this last update.
Well, yeah, broke my
Yeah.
site. That's my known issue.
Yeah, posting in, like, every theme and plugin has like a support tab on it, and you can just go in and post and say, hey, this doesn't work with version whatever, is there a known solution or something like that. They might not know, like a lot of these authors, this could be something they uploaded forever ago and just sort of forgot about. They might be totally unaware. In some of those cases, like, it might just be a function got deprecated and just needs to be replaced with a newer named function, and it's really not that big a deal for them to fix. So it's always worth asking.
Especially if you have that set up.
A lot of times it's the old thing, something needs to be updated there. If they're completely gone, it's time to ditch it. And it's worth that extra.
You can always fork a theme and fix whatever's broken.
Okay, I'll get right on that.
Interesting.
All right, I think we better probably give up the room, but thank you guys.
All about a moving target.